Starting off this countdown, we have the discipline. So the poor Roman warriors were disciplined through fear. If they were a coward in battle or were slacking while on duty, they would be stoned. Some would survive, others wouldn't. Even if they committed minor offenses, they would receive severe punishment. So basically, they were living in fear. They would always have to act strong and courageous, or else they would be severely injured. In fact, whips were often common at Roman military camps. Another cruel punishment would be slowly breaking the soldiers' ribs one by one. That is incredibly cruel and painful. They lost a lot of their warriors from these punishments. In our ninth spot, we have the mouthwash. And if you guys are liking this video so far, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. Also, if you want to see a Q&A, then make sure to go check out Most Amazing Elite, because right after this video, I'm doing a little Q&A answering your burning questions. So back in ancient Rome, urine was considered valuable. Sounds crazy and disgusting, I know. But they had people whose job was to go around collecting pee from public urinals, or they would go door to door asking people to do their business in a vat. Why? Well, they use this fluid for a lot of stuff. They would clean their clothes in it. And it's also how they clean their teeth. I know. They used to use pee as mouthwash. I want to just gag thinking about it. But according to them, they thought it was a way to keep their teeth pearly and clean. Can you imagine? No. And like other people's pee? No. Anyway, sorry. Moving on at number 8, we have the communal sponge. If you thought that point was bad, wait till you hear this one. So the public toilets in ancient Rome were absolutely disgusting. Sure, they had a pretty advanced sewer system for their time, but believe me, it wasn't pretty. In fact, it was said that it was hardly ever cleaned, if even at all. These toilets were shared with dozens of other people, but you were given one sponge on a stick. That sponge was used to wipe your behind. The sponge was never cleaned. So everyone was just sharing that dirty sponge wiper. I told you this point was gonna be bad. I just feel dirty talking about it. I need to go home and take a shower or something. Like other people on your bum. It's disgusting. In our 7th spot, we have the warrior blood. So apparently when a Roman gladiator or warrior lost their life, their blood was collected and then sold as medicine. The Romans believed that the warrior's blood had magical powers to it, and that it could cure epilepsy or diseases. That wasn't all though. They also would take out the warrior's liver and eat them raw. Again, for similar reasons. What's crazy is that it might have actually worked. Some Roman physicians reported that people that drank blood would actually be cured from their seizures. Even if that's the case, we aren't vampires, okay? Like, I'm not too keen on blood drinking. Moving on at number 6, we have the dead skin cells. I honestly don't know what the Romans were thinking. But basically, back then, soap was a rare commodity. So warriors and athletes would clean themselves by covering themselves in oil and then scraping the dead skin cells off their body with this special tool. Okay, I get it, like they like to exfoliate, and that's creative, I guess. But then they would save their sweat and skin scrapings and put it into a bottle. Then this was sold to women, and it was considered an aphrodisiac. Ew, just ew. But wait, it gets worse. The woman would then take this skin and sweat and rub it all over the face, like a face cream. They thought it would make them irresistible to men. Like, ew, imagine if that was still a thing nowadays. Any woman that did that would be considered a psychopath or something. We're now in our 5th and halfway mark with the cowards. Back then, warriors were super strict. They had no tolerance for cowards at all. In fact, they had very, very cruel punishments for people that would chicken out during battle. If you were deemed a coward, basically you were ridiculed, and then it would be hard to find a woman to marry. One of their punishments would be to go around wearing cloaks with patches of dyed cloth, looking untidy with only half of your beard shaved. Half. It was weird. This was considered a cruel and embarrassing punishment. But believe me, it's way better than some of the other punishments that they would go through. More on this shortly. Moving on to number 4, we have death first. Roman warriors did not take loss for an answer. It was either they win or they die trying. Literally. To them, if they were ever in a position where they had to surrender or were defeated, they were expected to take their own lives. To them, they rather die than surrender or lose, which was considered a huge disgrace. In our third spot, we have the GOAT energy drink. Nowadays, if people want a huge pick-me-up, they turn to Red Bull or Monsters. Well, back then, obviously they didn't have access to those drinks, but they did have access to a different kind of energy drink, one made from goat. So warriors that needed an energy boost would eat goat dung. Apparently, it gave them a good little pick-me-up. Actually, rumor has it that Emperor Nero loved to drink it. But that wasn't the only thing the dung was used for. They would use it as a makeshift band-aid to patch up their wounds. During the spring, they collected a bunch of it and then would dry it out. And ta-da! A band-aid. In emergencies though, they would just plop on fresh poo. In our second spot, we have decimation. One of the most brutal punishments the Roman warriors went through was something called decimation. Basically, a bunch of guilty men would be divided into groups of 10. From there, they would draw straws. The one who drew the shortest straw would be killed by the other 9 men. So basically, it was all left to chance. You better be extremely lucky, or else. They did this because they couldn't afford to kill off a bunch of warriors, so instead they just killed one off brutally to scare the other men. Now, decimation was around until the reign of Emperor Diocletian, which was 284 to 305 AD. And in our number 1 spot, we have punishment of the sack. This was another brutal form of punishment. Basically, the wrongdoer would have their head covered by a sack made from wolf skin. Their feet would then be covered in wooden shoes. From there, they would be beaten with rods. Not only that, but for the most part, the wrongdoer would be placed in the sack with other animals in it, like snakes or monkeys, and then it was sewn shut. Then the sack was dragged into the sea or river. So not only would they suffer from drowning, but they would be bit and scratched while on the way down. But this punishment was only saved for people that did the worst of the worst crimes, especially parricide, the killing of a parent or near relative. That was considered a sign of extreme ungratefulness and disrespect, something the Romans took very seriously. Starting off this countdown, we have the sword testing. Nowadays, if we need to test to make sure our knives are sharp enough, we typically would go cut something, like maybe an apple or bread, I don't know. But back then, samurai swords were tested by slicing people in half. Yeah, this was referred to as tamashigiri, which means test cut. If the person buying the sword was of high social standing, then the sword was tested on a criminal. The criminal, depending on the crime they committed, would either get a limb lopped off or they would just get cut in half. This was all done to show the samurai that the swords were sharp and good enough for them. What an interesting sales pitch. I'm glad that this kind of thing isn't around anymore. Moving on to number 9, we have the street gangs. And folks, here's your reminder to hit that thumbs up button because it really helps us out. There was a time where samurais would start dressing wildly and get a different haircut and then join a street gang. This happened when there was a lack of wars to fight. Samurais were bored and without a job, so they formed gangs. And soon, they had rivals. They would go around harassing the town, causing mayhem, and then they would fight their rivals. One of the gangs was known as the Street Knights. They would shave their sideburns up to their temples and had expensive fabrics draped over their shoulder. They were considered a group of vigilantes, and this all happened because they got bored, so they started causing ruckus. In our 8th spot, we have harakiri. Harakiri or seppuku was part of a samurai's code of honor. Basically, if they ever lost on the battlefield or were about to be captured, they had to take their own lives as a form of honor. They did this by slicing their stomach open with a small sword. They then would bleed out and die an excruciating death. Or you could resort to another method, which entails slicing your own stomach open, but then someone would decapitate you directly after, so your death was quick. But they wouldn't always do this on the battlefield. It was also done to restore honor for themselves or their families. In fact, they made a day out of it. First, they would write a death poem, have drinks, and a ceremonial bath. And then they would have their favorite meal. Then in front of an audience, the poem they wrote was said out loud. The samurai then says his final words, and then they would slice themselves open while people watched. In our 7th spot, we have Ronin. Ronin was the name given to a samurai that didn't have a lord or master. Maybe this was because their master had died, or the samurai disgraced them, so the master let them go. The name Ronin means wandering man. And that's because if a samurai's master passes, they're supposed to take their own life in honor. Same goes if they dishonor their master, they also have to take their life. Ronin were the rebels that didn't do this. In the end, they would go work as mercenaries. In our 6th spot, we have the extension of the soul. Believe it or not, but the samurai sword, the katanas, were considered an extension of the samurai's soul. In fact, there was a time where only samurais could carry katanas. They were considered a sign of wealth and status, and anyone who carried one that was of lower class would be killed immediately. Yeah, they meant no funny business. Again, like I said, it was an extension of their soul. So if they were to ever lose their honor, they would take their soul with the katana or the wakizashi. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the 2 swords. Did you know that the samurai had a specific sword that they would use to behead people? Yeah, so samurais carried 2 swords around with them. The katana, which was their big sword, and the wakizashi, which was their little sword. This was even sometimes kept under their pillow at night, cause you never know when you would need it while you're sleeping. You would think they would use the bigger sword to, lop people's heads off, but no, that's what the wakizashi was for. And after the deed was done, sometimes they would keep their victim's head as a trophy. In our 4th spot, we have the arrows. The samurai were also known to partake in a training exercise known as inuamono. If you're an animal lover, then maybe skip to the next point. But this would involve riding a horse while firing arrows at dogs. The dogs were their target practice. In fact, this became so popular that soon enough, Japanese nobles were partaking in it too. Now, not all of the arrows they used were sharp. Some would use padded arrows so the dogs wouldn't get injured, or they wouldn't get injured as bad. Still, it's so sad. Poor little doggies. Coming in at number 3, we have the disrespect. Back in the day, there was a practice known as kirasu gomen, which means authorization to cut and leave, referring to the body of a victim. Basically, this means that a samurai was allowed to kill anyone who they thought were disrespecting them. But there were 3 rules to this. 1, this had to be done right away. They couldn't go home and plan their murder. As soon as they felt disrespected, they had to do it. 2, they had to have a witness with them. So they couldn't just lie and kill someone and be like, oh yeah, they were disrespecting me. And 3, the victim had to be of lower class. But apparently they would often kill and then just use their servants as a witness. But if they were found guilty of killing without cause, they would be subjected to a severe punishment, like a shameful death. And then their house would be destroyed so that their sons could not take over the place and his title/position. Moving on to number 2, we have the crossroads killing. Suziguri, or the crossroads killing, was another dark practice done by the samurai. Basically, when a samurai got a new weapon or mastered a new fighting technique, they would practice this on a live person. They would walk around at night and then would attack a random innocent person. So yeah, a poor unfortunate soul would lose their life just so a samurai could practice. Now this was actually illegal, but samurai always got away with doing it because it was hard to arrest someone when there were no witnesses. It's not like they had forensic psychologists back then, okay? And then here's the thing. Let's say they were caught killing someone. Since they were of status, they could just lie and say they were invoking their right to, and bam, they would basically get away with murder. Again, glad this isn't a thing nowadays, because you would never catch me out at night. And in our number 1 spot, we have jigai. Jigai is basically like harakiri, but it's for the female members of the samurai's family. If the samurai in their family ever brought dishonor, then the samurai's wife would have to take her life. If the samurai had to commit seppuku, then his wife had to as well. But instead, they would slice their throat. They would also tie their knees together so that when they passed out, they wouldn't be found in an inappropriate position. Imagine that, having someone in your family screw up so you had to die for their problems. No, I'm not down for that, no thank you.
Number 10, Vlad the Impaler. To start off the list, we got a man who is rumored to start the myth of Dracula. Vlad the Impaler was the ruler of Wallachia between 1448 and 1476. Vlad got his famous name by doing the very obvious impaling. He would put a giant stake right at someone's rectum and then prop them up. Then the person would slowly slide down as it pierced through their whole body. Legend has it is he would take the shish kebab people and put them along the line to the walkway to his castle, like the most dramatic welcome mat. It was said to be so disturbing that when armies came to raid him, they would turn away in fear. But how did he get the name Dracula? Well, apparently when he would dine, he would dip his bread in the blood of his enemies. It's kind of a drama queen. We get it, you're evil. Number 9. King Leonidas, the man for the famous "This is Sparta!" He was one of the most feared warriors of all time. Now in the movie, they say it was 300 Greek Spartans against 1 million Persians. But it was more like 7,000 against 150,000. Still crazy odds. No smart gambler would ever take those odds. But through superior fighting techniques and being one of the scariest guys of all time, Leonidas and his men were able to slaughter thousands of Persian warriors. Eventually they were betrayed and Leonidas was killed, but they bought Greece enough time to get reinforcements to come back and win the war. Leonidas was said to be so powerful, people thought he was a descendant of Hercules himself. Number 8. Zhao Hu Dun. This is the kind of stuff that gets you feared throughout all time. Zhao Hu Dun was famous for being one of the most respected generals in the Eastern Han dynasty of China. From an early age, this guy was ferocious. He once killed a man for insulting his teacher when he was only 13. They tried to put him on an episode of Beyond Scared Straight, but he just started pimp slapping everyone. Now this is what has Xiao Hao forever locked in history as one of the most feared warriors of all time. During a battle against Lu Bu in the late 2nd century, Mr. Dun received an arrow in the eye. Now usually when someone gets an arrow in the eye, they either that or just die. Not this guy. He pulled the arrow out of his eye and then ate his eyeball off of the arrow. Like it was fondue. Are you kidding me? I'm so glad I'm born in the era of heated seats. Number 7. Galvarino. This one is so dope it could have been number 1. Galvarino was a Mapuche warrior in Chile. He fought when the Spanish were invading. During the Battle of Lagunitas, many of the Mapuche were captured. What the Spanish would do is cut off one of your hands and your nose and then send you back mutilated to strike fear into your soldiers. For Galvarino, they went the extra mile and cut off both his hands. This is where the story turns up. He went back to his people, showed them his disfigured body, and demanded justice. And justice is what he would receive. He was named commander of a squadron, and for the next battle, he tied knives to his stumps and went around knife punching people to death. Are you hearing this? He was doing Wolverine before Stan Lee was even a sperm. It said that a man questioned him once on how a man could fight with no hands, and he said, "I'll rip them apart with my teeth." Number 6. Lu Bu. Remember the guy who ate his own eyeball? This is the maniac he was fighting when that happened. Lu Bu was stomping around China during the late 2nd century. What made Lu Bu so feared wasn't that he was an excellent archer or a skilled swordsman, it was that he was straight up insane. Lu Bu was an orphan who was adopted into a home and cared for by his stepfather. One day, a warlord named Dong Zhou offered him a horse. But it wasn't just any horse. It was a red hare, the fastest horse in China. This is the Rolls Royce of horses. So Lu Bu, he cut off his stepfather's head to make Dong Zhou his new dad. Sometimes you get a really nice gift and you don't know how to show your appreciation. Lu Bu followed this up by banging Dong Zhou's mistress and then cutting off Dong Zhou's head and then going rogue with an army through the countryside. Number 5. Miyamoto Musashi. This guy is such a big deal, you can go out right now and buy his book. Have you ever heard of the Book of 5 Rings? The book about where there's only one skill, strategy, and through strategy you can master all other skills? I really like this book, so I'm just kind of being a fanboy right now. Possibly the most skilled swordsman who ever lived, Miyamoto Musashi was a samurai in Japan during the late 14th century into the early 15th century. What made this man so feared wasn't that he killed his first man when he was only 12 using a stick when the other guy had a sharpened blade, or that he would challenge opponents who mastered all different kinds of weapons, or that he went undefeated in 61 life or death matches. This guy's putting up Kobe numbers. It was that he would defeat all of his opponents using his mind, or in other words, strategy. He would do things like show up to a duel extremely late so his opponent would be flustered. On one occasion, he knew that his opponent was fighting with an extra long sword, so he made an even longer sword out of wood, so when they both drew, Miyamoto would land the killing blow. A true warrior who mastered his art and deserved to be feared. Tilihuecul, a silly name, a very scary dude. We're heading to Mexico during the late 13th century. This guy was a beast. He was said to be so powerful that others couldn't even lift his weapons that he brought into war. He was from the Tlaxcalan tribe, and during a war with the Aztecs, he was captured. However, King Montezuma found that he was so brave, he's probably just terrified of him, that he would let him go. But Tilihuecul refused and demanded to be given a warrior's death. So Montezuma gave him an Aztec tradition. He would be given his regular weapons and then attacked simultaneously by 8 of the finest Aztec warriors, and he killed all of them. Eventually, a 9th guy was able to come in and take him out. This dude killed 8 dudes in a row, no Gatorade break. Number 3, Pierre Jalof's Donya. This next guy was a farmer? Pierre was just a regular old farmer in 1515. That's until the Austrian mercenaries, the Habsburgs, came and brutally killed his wife and children. Then this dude literally goes Punisher. He lost everything, and now all he cares about is revenge. He got some rebels together and sent off as a pirate. It's estimated that he sunk as many as 138 Austrian ships. He also took his crew and ransacked 2 castles and killed an army that was 300 soldiers. These guys were rolling deep. He then retired in 1520. This dude was so good at killing people, he had to retire like it was a career. Somewhere in Austria they have his jersey hanging off the rafters. Number 2, Flamme, or otherwise known the Flame. Back in 60 AD, how did you get famous? There was no YouTube, there was no movies. You couldn't go on Dr. Phil and be like,
Catch me outside, how about that?
Catch you outside?
For the Roman gladiator Flamme, he only saw one way, and that way was killing a bunch of people for other people's entertainment. Sort of like an OJ approach. If you don't know how gladiators work, they were predominantly slaves, and if you won enough, you would be granted your freedom. Now Flamme didn't want freedom, he just wanted to be famous. We don't even know what his real name is because the gladiator persona took over. He spent 13 years as a gladiator, fought 30 battles, was offered his freedom at least 4 times and rejected it every single time. Imagine wanting the spotlight that bad. I would love for this dude to be alive today, who had definitely been interviewed on Rogan. Like, you've killed how many people? Bro, you should try DMT, it'll calm you down. And our number 1, Genghis Khan. Finally, we've come to the grand finale and we've got probably the most famous conqueror of all time. Genghis Khan was responsible for gaining the trust of several smaller Mongolian clans and convincing them to join forces in what would be the most savage army the world would ever see. The Mongolian Empire ended up spanning 24 square kilometers that killed upwards of 40 million people, which was 10% of the world's people at that time. 40 million people, that's more than all of Canada. There was literally so much less people and so much more vegetation in place of those people that Genghis Khan removed an estimated 700 million tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. The Mongolians were extremely terrifying. They had these massive siege machines that were used to shoot boulders over huge walls. But instead of putting boulders in them, they would put in dead bodies and light them on fire. Armies who would try to follow the Mongolian troops would often get sick from walking over all the rotted corpses in their path. This guy was serious.